Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Climbing Sycamores podcast, where we look at today's topics to get a better view of Christianity. I'm Annie Beege, and I'm joined by my friends Ben Sadler and Matt Harbach. And then there were three. We're all here today.
So good.
Hey, what are the
Gang's
odds?
all back together.
I know. It's good.
It is good.
Are you
Feels
feeling
right.
better, by the way? I was going to ask you
I
yesterday.
am. Yeah. It was. I thought it was allergies, and then it was not going away. But there is no sympathy in my house.
Okay.
Because my wife was like, "That's a man cold." I got up, had the same thing, went to work, took care of everything. You get the sniffles,
Wow.
and you can't move. So no sympathy in this house.
Wow.
Dang.
Just laid the
Brutal.
law. Yeah.
Brutal.
That's how we roll. So my
I was-
wife's either tougher than me or just more judgmental.
Hey, Emily.
Annie,
love
don't kid
you.
yourself. She doesn't listen to this.
Yeah, she does. She does.
She does. She likes
Yeah.
this podcast.
Well, I wanted to ask a question that's been to you guys. This is a complete surprise to them, by the way. So, it was kind of a trend on TikTok, and so the question is, how many times a week do you think about the Roman Empire? Right, Matt? You know why? You know what I'm saying? Do we need to cut this?
So dumb. Oh my god.
The Roman Empire?
Yes.
This has been a trend.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. This is the stupidest
See,
thing
this is
ever.
letting me to think that this is about something else.
No, it's not about anything else. Here's the deal.
How many? So, how many times
fact
a week?
is,
Zero?
I
think
mentioned
about
in
it.
my last sermon. I mentioned it yesterday.
No, see, the thing is,
Did you? I must have done. I listened to it twice. How did
I think about it every day because I see that stupid post everywhere about thinking about the Roman Empire.
So how? Okay, so obviously,
Just in general?
Just in general.
I would say once a week.
okay.
I don't know.
Is this some innuendo I'm not catching
Well,
up
see,
on?
that's
All right,
that's what I'm concerned about. I'm
there's
starting to
some-
think there's something else
some
about
kind
it.
of joke. I don't think it is. I think it's just a legit thing.
Right. So that was trending on TikTok, and
Oh, for heaven's sake!
typically it's women asking men, and I think the theory behind it is just like, just that they were, powerful and things, what.
It's a reaction. It's like a reaction because men for several years now, like men don't feel like they have as much of a voice or as much of a position in society. And I think it's just like you think back to the Roman Empire. It's like this obviously like dominantly masculine institution. So, Ben,
You
did
said I needed to Google this.
No, I didn't say
And
you need.
before
Oh,
we got
so
online,
dumb.
before we got on
So
podcast, you
dumb.
said the question I'm going to ask, you might have to Google this
Yeah, you
afterwards.
can Google it.
Yeah.
What does it say? Just wants to know how many times you think about the Roman Empire in a week.
Yeah, I don't get the meaning behind this.
No, it's gonna fade. It's just a dumb trend.
Okay. Well,
What's
I-
behind it for you?
I
How
think
often do you think
zero,
about
zero. I never,
Are you
ever, ever, ever.
serious?
I never
Never?
think. Well, see, and I would argue ever. You sometimes think about the Roman, like what? I never think about it. It never crosses my mind.
I never really thought about it, but then people just kept posting stuff about it, and so then obviously I was thinking about it then.
So what is this is just like a self-fulfilling like
Yes,
thing.
exactly.
You think about it
Like-
because it's been brought
Well,
up.
it's like that stupid game, where people are like, you're now if you think about the game, it's a game, and you like if you think about the game, you lose the game.
Oh.
It's like it's just a dumb like mind game thing. It's just nonsense.
Out of all the questions you could have potentially asked
That
me,
wasn't it.
That
You
was
didn't know?
I didn't
Yeah.
I didn't see that one coming. But if you believe in the Enneagram,
Yes.
you and Bill both being sevens,
Yes.
you have no time for the past.
No, zero. So I don't think about that.
Yeah.
I don't think about
Whenever
that.
I bring up like history or anything, Bill's like, I don't know. Why
next.
would I? Yeah, next. You're boring me right now. You're but I think about it all the time because
It's important.
they owned the world for 400 years.
Oh, the Roman Empire?
Yes. They
Yes,
did.
it's true.
They
Okay.
owned the world for 400 years plus. And now no one thinks about them. Just think about that. Like we think as the United States that we are going to be the superpower forever. We're not.
Yeah.
And so that's what makes me think about it.
Okay.
Well, and like Benito Mussolini in World War II was like trying to like
Revitalize
play off that like Roman glory, and it's like all you guys have wine and pasta.
That's
You're just
all
like a little country now, and you have wine and pasta.
That's all you got
No one
left.
cares. Not then.
Is this like a trick question to see how long we will keep talking about the Roman Empire?
I don't know, but I'm thinking that. I'm thinking that it might be.
If you want to see how boring the people are that you hang out with, ask them this question. See how long they keep talking about it.
No, I don't mind. I think history is important. I just it's just not my bag, dude. I don't know.
Yeah, it's amazing what they're able to accomplish, but yeah, it's amazing how much we don't think about them either.
Or do we?
Well, the thing I wanted to talk about was an article on the Mockingbird website. I bring this up quite a bit. David Zoll kind of leads this website where they kind of look at culture to see where they can find grace and its absence and see what's going on in culture. And David Zoll's brother, Simeon Zoll, wrote this article on hiding in plain sight, the lost doctrine of sin. And I think he teaches at Oxford. And I thought it was an interesting article. I'm not going to read all of it, but I thought I could bring up some of the points that, let's see here. He talks about the doctrine of sin is the basic Christology we confess in the creeds, and it's just weird and it's not just a weird and unnecessary paradox. The same could be said of the doctrine of the Trinity, or salvation. These are fundamental theological doctrines, he says. My point is this: the edifice of Christian belief, the doctrine of sin, is a major load-bearing structure. It is not theologically optional. To lose it, or to downplay it, or reframe it in terms that are less offensive to our sense of self-worth, is in the long run to render Christianity unintelligible to people. It will become a floating shell, unmoored from its historical foundation, from its own inner logic, and from the realities of human lives. And he talks about how hard it is to talk about these things with his students at Oxford. You know, you can talk about almost anything in his theology classes, but when you bring up sin,
They get all squirmy
they
and
get all
uncomfortable.
squirmy. Yeah. It's so, he says, but there's one topic I never feel like they're tracking with me. There's one theological bone that they just can't seem to swallow, and that's the doctrine of sin. When I try to explain that Christians have traditionally believed that human beings are deeply flawed from birth, and furthermore that God is profoundly unhappy about these flaws, I watch my students' eyes grow skeptical. I watch their postures shift, the way students always do when they disagree with what you're telling them. Not all of the students disagree, but many do. It is the annual skeptical moment in these lectures. So you guys had a chance to at least skim the article, read over, what are some thoughts that you have of this idea of the importance of bringing up sin, what we've done to sin, the minimizing of sin, what this does to the whole Christian message, really? What do you guys think?
Well, people don't like concepts like good and evil.
It's too concrete, too black and white,
too reductive.
Yeah.
You know, like we talked about with Sam Harris's view that there really is no evil. And I think that, I mean, my personal opinion on all of this stuff is that people never think these things through, and they, it's a criticism of Christianity to always go to the extreme or like go to the ultimate answer.
Sure.
But at the same time, like you have echoes of an ultimate when you have any sort of binary. Like if there's good and bad, if there's better and worse, you can keep just going in those directions because you start having people all agree like this is definitely better than this, which is better than this, which is better than this, and that's worse and worse and worse. It's like, how can you keep going in those two directions and you're telling me there's not a destined, like,
where's this going to end up?
There's got to be some source of that or some ultimate end to either of those two things. Good and evil.
So you think about, you're now a high school teacher.
Barely, but yeah. They pay me like one.
Yeah. You talk about, I know your classes are on film and cinematography and things like that. But I just wonder if, bringing that up with high school students right now, even at a Christian school, how much they would squirm. And I just in modern culture, I know I've noticed even myself in preaching, somebody had this critique of my preaching years ago that I wasn't using the word sin anymore. I was just saying brokenness. And they thought that was a minimization, that I'm minimalizing sin, not making it as clear as what I could.
How did you feel about that?
I got it. I thought, maybe it's not a bad critique. I could see how maybe I was softening it. I guess in my head, the way I was thinking was, we say sin so much now, or that it doesn't, or we don't even use it,
Sure.
That it's become a word that doesn't have meaning. So, that chocolate is sinfully good or whatever, like something like that, where that's the only time you hear sin in culture anymore.
Yep.
And so that something's broken about us, that we can't fix ourselves, made sense. But I appreciate what he had to say.
Yeah, because I brought this up, and I guess I can bring it up now. I've had the same thought. You have to use a word: sin, wicked, evil. That's what the Bible calls it. And I brought this up before, but Annie, I showed you this post or something, and it was from a big mega church in the United States. And the lead pastor was saying something like, God wants to kind of save you from your struggle, or like, you need to turn to God to get over your weaknesses or something like that. And he didn't want to use the word sin.
Right.
I don't remember if it was a video or a post or something, but at multiple junctures, there should have been the word sin or wickedness.
Right.
And there was weakness and struggle. And I feel like the trend is that we want to make things applicable and accessible to people. We don't want to use words that are unfamiliar, right? And especially for new people, we want to make sure that we're like giving them something that they can understand. New people come into the church. And so I don't know if at Victory we've ever actually done this. I hope not. But we talk a lot about like your anxieties, your depression, your guilt, and the pressures of life. And I hope that we are not suggesting that Jesus came to save you, at least in the short term, from the pressures of your adult life and the guilt you feel and the anxiety you feel. Jesus came to forgive sins, your evil, and those other things are going to be with you the whole time. And you can turn to Jesus, you can pray to Jesus, and you can find some peace from those things.
Right.
But those are not your chief problem.
Yeah.
And that's not why Jesus came. And that stuff kind of makes my ears prick up.
Sure.
When you start hearing that, like, I would call it a watering down, because if there is no sin, there is no forgiveness.
Right.
And if there's no forgiveness or grace, we're not a church.
Right.
We're group therapy.
Right. Right. I think you're right. One thing that I think the connection sometimes with emotions is like they're signals to a deeper problem. And so, but that can be very tricky, that if you are just dealing with the outward emotions. I think about the early on in the scriptures, Genesis chapter 4, when Cain is feeling sorry for himself because God didn't accept his offering like he accepted Abel's. And the text says that Cain was hot with anger and his face downcast. So he was angry and sad. And so he was walking around angry and sad, and God comes to him and he says, sin is crouching. He said, first of all, he says, why are you so angry? And why is your face downcast? If you would do what is right, wouldn't you be approved? But sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. And so God does point out right away some of these outward emotions that he has, like you're sad and you're angry. But what are these emotions leading you to do? You're accepting them, you're ruminating on them, and he's saying sin is going to get in through those emotions and it's going to rule over you. It's like a tiger crouching at your door and it wants to eat you alive. You have to rule over it. So
the emotion itself is not sinful. It's what kind of the door, the portal that it opens to allow, right? Is that?
I think so. I think the emotions are kind of like, can be like the check engine light on your car. Like they're a warning that something deeper is going on.
So you're saying I should ignore them?
Yeah, like you do with your car. That's me
Yes.
too. Me too. Well, you could, and then guess what happens? That's a perfect example. You ignore some of these emotional things. You're going off on people, or you're severely worried or severely depressed, and you're not attending to them. It's letting you know that something deeper is going on. And in Cain's case, it was resentment, which is a sin. It was entitlement. It was envy. Very sinful things that when they were on the surface, was anger and sadness. And I think it's right that a lot of times anger is a secondary emotion, that there's something. What I've been using with my men's mentoring is, the classic iceberg illustration. I know we wouldn't have any illustrations if it wasn't for icebergs, so thank God for icebergs. But, like these emotions are on the surface level. So I think it can be used in preaching and teaching, talk about emotions, but you do need to get to the under the water core issues that are more than just kind of, life is hard and I feel anxious or depressed, or just, we're not just here to merely do therapy. So I agree with that. I'd be happy to keep reading or read some more unless there's more comments on that.
So, I was going to say, why don't students today, I mean, he's suggesting, right, that that's a new thing, that this new generation, whatever, Gen Z or whichever generation he's talking about, I'm assuming Gen Z, if they're college kids, but they have not been raised with these fundamental, core ideas of human nature.
So, he talks about in here that when modern people, here's a paragraph, when modern people hear the word sin, when they hear someone describe the idea that human beings are fundamentally flawed in a very deep way, seeking our own best interests over that of others, and for reasons that lie at the core rather at just the periphery of our nature, and when they hear that human beings might, on this basis, be liable fundamentally to judgment, when they hear all this, I think they actually hear me say something like, it's right to judge people for their flaws rather than having compassion on them. Or perhaps, I think I'm better than other people and have the right to judge them. In a way, you could say that my students don't like the idea of sin because it sounds immoral to them. My students get uncomfortable because the doctrine of sin is heard as a violation of their moral values. It encourages judgmentalism, repression, not accepting people as they are, and creepy religious power dynamics.
Okay.
Now, it is in fact the case, at least in my own view, that these inferences about the judgmentalism and the lack of compassion and so on are seriously inaccurate conclusions to draw from the Christian doctrine of sin. The reason people draw such conclusions is either because they've never really had a chance to think the issue through, or else because the form of Christianity they have thus far encountered is a decadent one. So they hear this, that Christians are going around saying you're sinful from birth, or you're fundamentally flawed, and they think that gives you a reason to judge people and to set up kind of judgmentalism, that kind of thing. But he's going to get to, it's actually the reason we can have compassion on everybody is that we all need to be rescued.
Well, yeah, everybody has it. So, so it's not like we can point out one person or another. Everybody's got it. So there's, in terms of judgmentalism, we could point the finger at everyone.
Right. I think for me, the hard part just internally, when you really try to accept this idea of universality of sin, that we have all sinned, it's so hard to accept that I can't just improve myself, that I can't just figure out whatever that flaw is, set up the right system, and just self-improvement my way out of this. And everybody who's tried to do that, nobody comes out clean. You look at these different stars, whether it's a great athlete, a great musician, a great leader, a great politician, whatever it is, you think that They have it all together. They figured out the system to make their life the way it's supposed to be, and you just follow them long enough and they implode, or they show themselves to not be the ideal person you thought they are. So we just haven't seen it work everywhere. So I don't like it. I don't like the idea of sin just fundamentally, because it's hard to accept that I would need to be rescued. But when I look at the world, it's just how it is. Like,
it doesn't bother me to say that it doesn't
Right.
to say that like I'm not perfect and I need help and I need to be rescued.
Yeah.
It literally doesn't bother me. Like, I don't know. So
Yeah.
this is difficult for me to
right. That's good.
speak on, because
You
I
just
don't.
have a very cavalier attitude toward your sin. It just doesn't bother you at all.
Well, maybe honestly, truly, maybe it should bother me more.
no, I'm just messing.
But I'm not gonna. It's not gonna be like crippling to the like some people have crippling. But there's definitely times where
I think
feel
my
the sting.
personality is, I would like to think I could work my way out of my problems, that I could just figure out the right answer.
Yeah.
And
I
God
know
can,
better.
and I think that's what keeps me coming back to the gospel, and why I'm so thankful to not only be a Christian but be a pastor, is like, you can't find your way out of your problems. You can't, even on your best days, when you're really honest, that selfishness comes in, and you're like, wow, I can't get out of my own way. I can maybe kind of manage it at some level where I'm not a crazy sociopath, but I need to be rescued all the time. And I think that's what keeps me coming back to Christianity. And I think it's just so true, and makes me thankful that, I get to preach this on a regular basis, because I don't see any other way out of our own way.
Well, I think if you live by your own accomplishments, and you get reassurance through that, then you will die by your failures.
Right,
And so like you have
exactly.
to find some way to like just be neutral about it. And if that makes sense.
There is kind of a fascination, I think, with stories of implosion, like documentaries and things like that. I wasn't able to finish it, but Emily and I started watching the Johnny Manziel, the football player who really gifted, played for Texas A&M, and just imploded. Just didn't seem to be able to do anything wrong. He just kind of had they call him Johnny Football, because he was so good and just did these incredible things, but didn't make it out of college, didn't make it to the pros, because just how much he imploded. So anytime we think we can construct our own success and figure it all out, create the utopian life or utopian society, there's just a flaw in the system, and that's us, right? So I think that's why communism has never succeeded, socialism never succeeded, because we always think the problem is outside of us. And anytime you think all of our problems are outside of us, and if we could just wall ourselves off from outside influence, then we would have everything we need. But the problem is inside of us. We can't get away from it.
So the climate today is to say that people should be accepted for who they are, and that you should be able to pursue the deepest desires of your heart to become your ideal self. And that what's holding you back is judgmentalism or society, or I don't know, some social constraints that are keeping you from being your ideal self. But if you just pursue what you want, you will become the happiest, most enlightened, elevated version of yourself.
Right. And that hasn't worked.
For anybody, right?
Right.
Sounds like a load.
Right. And I think that's the whole idea, like, of self-actualization. If we really just believed in ourselves, or did everything that, if we live by the motto, if it feels good, do it, we cause all sorts of problems in our lives.
Yeah.
So I think it is a hard thing to accept for some people, not for appreciate that you're able to.
I feel like, is there something wrong with me? 'Cause
No,
I'm like,
there's
well,
not.
Okay.
No,
I guess,
that's good.
Well.
But I think, what he's talking about here is when he talks to these students, and I think it's maybe because we have been fed so much therapeutic jargon, which some of it can be helpful, but a lot of it is self-actualization, self-reliance, self-belief. And there's just no room to be critical. There's no room to say, yeah, but there's some things about yourself you shouldn't do. You shouldn't just live into. And I think that's the issue.
Yeah. I can't get behind that.
But
Get
I think
behind what? Just feeling that just do what makes you feel good.
That, and then there's also, it seems like, don't forget to like love yourself today, or like, you treat yourself, you deserve this.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that unless the scales start tipping.
Sure.
Because I think, there's a fine line between, feeling confident
Sure.
and in your abilities and what in your jobs and in your friendships and things like that. That's a good thing, and I think it's important.
Sure.
I do think it's important to love yourself. I
Right.
think that's important. But when the scale starts tipping, that's different.
I think what you're saying is true. I think my problem is because I always see that kind of thing in the context of like, ignore your flaws, just love yourself, accept yourself for who you are.
Right.
Kind of.
Right.
It's like, no.
I think to be very wary of the potential to act incredibly selfish. Like, you hope you don't. You hope you live by the Spirit. You hope you're confident in the service you can provide, ways that you can serve other people and your role at your job and your house and all that. But always be careful not to read your own press. Be careful that you have checks and balances with yourself. Be careful to recognize that, there was a phrase that one theologian would say, I think it was Moody, who he was walking by a drunk by the street, and somebody said to him, like, look at this guy or whatever. And he's like, there but for the grace of God go I. And I thought that's kind of where that phrase comes from. And that's, I think, a good way to look at it. Like, if it wasn't for God's grace, I'd be in the same boat as anybody else. And so to just be very humble and aware that we all have the potential to screw it all up, Here's how it ends. You mind if I read a little bit more and it kind of get some more context?
Please
Okay.
do.
So he says, in other words, we resist the notion of sin because we don't know how to think of moral transgression other than as a form of making bad choices. The belief that we must let the world off the hook for its problems and its sufferings because so many of them were not chosen only makes sense if we also believe quite robustly in the freedom of the will. But here's where we run into problems. In fact, the fact is the world is still really, really screwed up. People still do terrible and selfish things all the time. And it's demonstrably the case that, given the chance, we tend to oppress others, we tend to seek our personal advantage at the expense of our neighbors, and we are heavily biased towards plugging our ears to the suffering of those around us. So what happens if you want to acknowledge that such evils do exist, but you also believe that the only form that true human moral transgression takes is that of conscious and freely chosen evil? Well, you end up in a terrible bind, because then you can't really make sense of the evils that aren't freely chosen. I think this is part of why the most moral discourse today focuses on the structural evil, like evils that are going on in the world.
Yeah.
We have to lay the blame on all the evils on big external structures because we no longer have the vocabulary for making sense of the fact that the realities of personal sins are always explicable. And so he's talking about, like, it's much easier today to blame the sin on institutions and big pharma and all of that because we don't want to talk about how we're bound by our sinful nature to very often kind of go in that direction of sin. So because we've lost that vocabulary, we don't have anywhere to go. I think about Russell Brand. You follow him? Mm-hmm. He's interesting conversation lately about all the things that he's kind of uncovering or whatever, but he's sees all the problems out there on big pharma, big corporations, big institutions, but just going smaller isn't necessarily going to take all our problems away. Just breaking up big institutions, it's just they're just a kind of a conglomerate of human beings. That they're us. If we get too big, it's just a bigger part of us, which is more sin. So I'll just kind of jump ahead. He says, Jesus had a way of talking about all of this. For Jesus, both things were true. The sins of the world really are my fault, and I really and truly can't help it. Those who are healthy have no need of a physician, but the sick. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners, is what Jesus said. Here the moral knot becomes untangled. In the eyes of such mercy, human beings are indeed caught in an unbearable situation. We are truly transgressors. We truly cannot help it. Sin really is a sickness, a disease contracted, and a corruption unchosen, a natal condition. And it really is sin. Our brains and our hearts are indeed broken, and this fact is not morally neutral. We need an answer from the outside, one that has both compassion and moral seriousness. And, well, you know the rest. So then he goes on to explain the gospel. So I just think it was a really good article on if we don't really talk about not just the sin out there and not just the sin of bad upbringing, but the sin that's inside of us, there's really no need for Jesus. But there's also no way to explain our situation either. We end up only blaming other people and just saying, if somebody would have had a better upbringing or someone had a better situation, or if it's the problem of these big corporations, we just don't get to the point of being humble and thankful at the same time, which I think the gospel brings. So,
and all those things are factors, right? I mean,
yes.
Right? Like upbringing and
they are.
Social, things and whatnot. Like those are factors, and
we should work hard to
combat,
to go against those. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think then going back to there, but for the grace of God, go I, let's not then get into if we had that same kind of upbringing, we wouldn't be necessarily any different.
Right,
like there's nothing morally better about us than that other person who's in that situation, I think. So, yeah. So there's more there. I think Mockingbird, they have lots of good insights into culture and what the struggle is right now. And this whole idea that we're not talking about it anymore. So, Matt, you brought this up. Do you think we need to be clear in our teaching and preaching on sin?
It's hard because if you have people coming in to church, right, they have no idea if they're guests, and we really, really like when guests come around here. I don't think that you can ever water it down though, because if they're gonna stay, if they're gonna believe what you say, it's not gonna be because you laid out a trail of breadcrumbs and they finally understood what it means. It's like you're gonna speak the truth, and they're gonna respect that, or they're not.
Right.
Well, I think it's tricky because I'll give you an example. When I started coming to Victory of the Lamb and became confirmed, I came to the Wells as an adult or whatever. So I took a class, and I had a couple of friends come with me who were not religious. They came with me, and the very first lesson was this sin, 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 sin. And that was it. There was no, I don't think even a mention of gospel in there. Or maybe there was, I don't remember. But again, I'm not bothered by the fact that take this. I don't like sin. Sin's bad.
Yeah, gotcha.
But I'm not crippled with guilt over it and just because of Jesus. So anyway, my friends never came back.
Yeah.
They didn't want anything to do with it ever again.
Right.
Still to this day.
Right.
And so I don't want to sugarcoat things, but I do think there's something cautionary about just pounding it down people's throats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean, what's the alternative to
Well, I think, I guess I don't know. Talking about it, and I don't know. That's Ben's job.
You figure it out.
Yeah, I think for me the idea of translation, what I mean by that is saying things in a way that you're not watering it down, but that people can understand it and they can hear it. I think sometimes with some of this, if it gets caught, rather than just taught, how much we can't get out of our own way. Like, would you really want someone to have a video camera on you for your whole life?
See, and I think it's stuff like that makes, yes.
And then, so, and these signs of maybe being worried or concerned or afraid or feeling a sense of regret, however, these feelings you have, again, I think they're signs. They're the check engine light that's saying there's something wrong under the hood. There's regrets because of selfish acts. And at the end of the day, we're going to have to get to that point of selfish acts. Now, when you finally face the fact that you've done selfish things, you can either blame it away and say it was just because of the situation I was in. It wasn't that big of a deal. It wasn't really that selfish. Or you can say, yeah, it was selfish. Thank God I have a Savior. Because there's no way to explain this away after a while. So it is the most challenging diagnosis. It's this, it's like getting a cancer diagnosis, but when you receive it, it's also, but I have good news. Yeah. But it is hard. And unfortunately, people don't necessarily always wait to hear the good news.
Right. But I think the way it's different to say you're sinful from birth.
Yeah.
Your newborn baby is sinful. Sin is a diagnosis. Well, right. Well, you feel like you need to hear that. Like, I don't know. Maybe, right. I don't know. You're just weird. But so I think that is different than saying, listen, we struggle to find who to vote for because the government, for instance, is made up of people who are sinful,
right.
and therefore the government is imperfect. And so
right.
if you can provide these examples of situations in our lives, big pharma and things like that you can say like, look, and then break it down and say like, this is because it's run by human beings and nobody's perfect.
Right. And
therefore, if you are not perfect, you have sin in you.
Right.
That's just so simple. And again, I've said this before, nobody would dare admit to say that they're perfect.
Right.
So therefore...
Right. What's the opposite?
Right.
Right.
And that's all it takes is to be imperfect in the slightest degree.
And I think that's what he's getting at in this article, that's the when people hear it, initially they're uncomfortable because they have all these ideas about what that means. Well, that means you can be judgmental. That means you can look down on people. That means, and so you jump to all these conclusions instead of having people come. There's something to the fact of indirect communication, and direct communication is you're sinful, you screwed this up, you're a mess. But even the Apostle Paul and Jesus, very often, they do indirect communication. Like Jesus will tell a story, a man goes up and to the temple and he starts praying about himself. Kind of, what do you think about that? And then there's this other man who goes and prays, God have mercy on me, a sinner, doesn't look up to heaven. Which one do you think God should forgive or God would accept? And so he tells it in a very indirect way. Even when David is confronted by the prophet Nathan. So he doesn't say, David, you slept with Bathsheba and you murdered Uriah. He tells him a story, and he does it indirectly. And so I think that is a way to kind of sneak past our defenses, is to do it indirectly. And hopefully it really does come down to motivation. Are you saying something indirectly because you don't believe it and you want to water it down, or are you saying it indirectly because you're hoping to lower the defenses?
Be more effective, yeah.
And having people receive it and see it for what it really is. But it is hard to talk about.
Or I just don't, I guess, understand why people don't live in the real world and just take accountability for it. That's, I think, why I just don't have because I consider myself to be an accountable person.
Right.
So I don't understand why it's hard for people to take accountability for their shortcomings. Like, I just don't understand it.
I think you're right. Well, yeah. And I think we find all sorts of different ways to escape the accountability, to explain it away. But sometimes it's just standing there right in your face. What else are you going to do besides confess it? Right? Yeah. Well, Matt, according to your desire,
you're sinful.
Hell and brimstone next Sunday. When I'm preaching.
Yes.
But there's good news.
It's too bad we don't have a pulpit. Just
I could pound it a little bit more.
Slam the pulpit a little bit.
I think it is a strange thing in the fact of where you look at the world and there's so many good things. And objectively, you look at a beautiful baby, you look at a beautiful sunny day like it is today, you look at so many good, incredible blessings, and then to bring in this idea of sin into that seems foreign. And yet, on the other hand, if you're watching the news, if you're been through a tragedy, if you imploded yourself, then all of a sudden that becomes much more relevant. But it's really both. Both of them are here in the opening pages of the Bible. We have God creating a good world, and so there's so many things we should expect to be good in this world, and yet it's been tainted, and so we shouldn't be surprised when there's selfishness in this good world. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you, guys. I thought that was a helpful.
Thick topic.
Thick.
All right.
Not the good kind. If you'd like to get a hold of us here at the Climbing Sycamores podcast, feel free to email bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. If you like today's intro music, it's been brought to you by Andrew Lynch's song, My Name, Hello.